She spat in my face when I proposed on Christmas in front of my entire family, so I showed her the door and let karma handle the rest. I'm a 29-year-old guy. I just had the most humiliating Christmas of my entire life. But honestly, looking back now, I dodged the biggest bullet imaginable. Sometimes you need to get completely blindsided before you can see clearly. And that's exactly what happened to me. 3 years ago, I met this woman named Aurora at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was absolutely stunning, smart, funny, everything I thought I'd been looking for. We hit it off immediately, talking for hours while everyone else was doing their own thing. By the end of the night, I had her number, and within 2 weeks, we were officially dating. Things moved fast. Within 6 months, she was staying at my place more nights than not. Then, after 8 months, she officially moved in with all her stuff. Here's where I should have seen the red flags. But love makes you stupid. I've learned that lesson the hard way now. I have a decent job as an accountant at a mid-sized firm. I make around $95,000 a year, which is comfortable for my area in the Midwest. I own a 2-bedroom apartment that I bought before we ever met, and I drive a reliable car that's completely paid off. Nothing flashy, but I'm financially stable, and I worked hard to get there. Aurora worked part-time at a boutique clothing store, making maybe $1,800 a month if she was lucky. And from the moment she moved in, she contributed absolutely nothing financially. I'm talking zero rent, zero utilities, zero groceries, nothing. Not a single dollar toward our shared living expenses. At first, I genuinely didn't mind because I thought we were building something together. I figured once she got more stable in her career, or maybe found full-time work, we'd balance things out. That's what partners do, right? They support each other through the rough patches. But whenever I gently brought up the idea of her contributing even just a couple $100 a month for groceries or utilities, she'd flip the whole thing around on me. She'd say I was trying to control her, that I was making her feel small and inadequate. She'd accuse me of being obsessed with money and keeping score like some kind of landlord instead of her boyfriend. She'd hit me with the classic line that a real man wouldn't nickel and dime the woman he loved. She had this way of making me feel like I was the bad guy for even suggesting we split anything, like I was being petty and unromantic for expecting basic financial partnership. So I just kept paying for everything. The mortgage, the electric bill, the internet, all the groceries, gas for both our cars. Somehow I even ended up paying for her car insurance because she said she couldn't afford it, and I didn't want her driving without coverage. I was slowly draining my savings account, but I kept telling myself this was temporary, that things would get better once she figured out her career, that we were partners building a life together. Looking back, I was basically her financial support system, while she contributed nothing but excuses. About 5 months before Christmas, I started seriously thinking about proposing. Despite all the financial red flags I was ignoring, I loved her. I really did. And I thought maybe marriage would bring us closer together and give her the security she needed to finally step up and be an equal partner. That was my logic anyway. Pretty naive in retrospect. I started looking at engagement rings and doing research because I wanted to get her something beautiful, something she'd be proud to show off to her friends and family. I spent weeks comparing prices and styles, learning about the 4 C's, visiting different jewelers on my lunch breaks. I saved up for 2 solid months, skipping lunches at work and bringing sandwiches from home. I canceled my gym membership to save the monthly fee. I stopped going out with my friends on weekends. I was basically living like a broke college student again, so I could afford something special for this woman I loved. I ended up spending $8,200 on a white gold ring with a 1-carat diamond. Not massive or flashy, but definitely respectable, and honestly way more than I could comfortably afford. I put part of it on a credit card because I wanted it to be perfect for her. I decided Christmas would be the perfect time to propose because my whole family would be together. Aurora had always gotten along great with them, or so I thought. She was charming and friendly at family gatherings, always helping my mom in the kitchen and chatting with my aunts. Everyone seemed to like her. My parents were hosting Christmas dinner at their house like they do every year. My older sister and her husband were coming, my younger brother who was home from grad school, my aunt and uncle from 2 towns over. The whole crew would be there. I pictured this beautiful family moment that we'd all remember forever. The night I proposed to the love of my life, surrounded by everyone who mattered. Christmas Eve came and I was a nervous wreck. I had the ring box in my jacket pocket, and I kept checking it every 5 minutes to make sure it was still there. My palms were sweaty. My heart was racing. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say probably 100 times in the mirror. We drove to my parents' house together, and everything seemed completely normal. Aurora was chatting and laughing, singing along to Christmas songs on the radio. She seemed happy and relaxed, excited about the holiday. I had no idea what was coming. Dinner was amazing. My mom went all out with prime rib, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, The whole traditional spread. Everyone was in such a great mood, laughing and telling stories, and just enjoying being together. It felt like the perfect setup for the most important question of my life. After dessert, when everyone was sitting around the table feeling full and content, sipping coffee and picking at the last of the pie, I figured this was my moment. My hands were trembling as I pushed back my chair and stood up. I could feel my heart absolutely pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the ring box. I got down on one knee right there in front of everyone, and the room went completely silent. You could feel the anticipation in the air. Everyone was smiling, and my mom had her hands over her mouth with tears already forming in her eyes. My sister was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. I looked up at Aurora and started telling her how much I loved her, how I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her, how she made me happier than I'd ever been, how I couldn't imagine my future without her in it. I poured my heart out right there on one knee while my entire family watched. Then I opened the ring box and held it up to her, my hands shaking slightly. The diamond caught the light from the chandelier and sparkled beautifully. The smile dropped off her face instantly. She stared at the ring for what felt like forever. The silence in the room shifted from anticipation to confusion, and then she looked at me with this expression of pure disgust, like I'd just presented her with a dead animal instead of an engagement ring. She said, and I quote, "Are you serious right now?" Everyone was still frozen. Nobody understood what was happening. This wasn't how proposals were supposed to go. She looked down at the ring again and literally wrinkled her nose like she smelled something rotten. Then she said the words, "I'll never forget as long as I live. This ring is small and pathetic, just like you." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop from 3 rooms away. My mom gasped audibly. My sister's mouth fell open in shock. My dad was already half up from his chair, his face going red. But Aurora wasn't done. Not even close. She kept going like she'd been holding this in for months and finally had the chance to let it all out. She told me her friend Jessica got engaged 2 months ago and her ring was 3 carats. She said Jessica's boyfriend had class and taste, that he understood a woman's worth. She said I was clearly cheap and didn't value her at all if this was the best I could do. She said she couldn't believe I'd embarrass her like this in front of people with such a tiny, sad little ring, that she'd been expecting something spectacular after 3 years together, that all her friends would laugh at her if she showed them something this pathetic. I was still kneeling there in complete shock. I literally couldn't process what was happening. My brain was trying desperately to catch up with reality. This woman I'd loved and supported for 3 years, the woman I'd sacrificed my savings for, was absolutely destroying me in front of my entire family on Christmas. Then she did something I still can't fully believe actually happened. She leaned forward and she spat directly in my face. Actual spit, right in my face. In front of my parents, my siblings, my aunt and uncle. Everyone. My mom screamed. My dad jumped up and yelled at her to get out of his house. My brother moved toward us like he was ready to physically remove her, but I held up my hand to stop him. I didn't want this to escalate into something physical. I slowly stood up from my knee, pulled out my pocket square, and wiped her spit off my face. Then I looked her dead in the eyes and said as calmly as I could manage, "We're done. Get out of my apartment and out of my life." She actually laughed, like this was all funny to her, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She said fine. She'd been meaning to tell me anyway. And then, right there in front of everyone, she announced that she'd been seeing her ex-boyfriend for the past 4 months. His name was Oliver, and she said he was more of a man than I'd ever be, that he knew how to treat a woman properly, that he didn't nickel and dime her like I did. She said I was boring, cheap, and controlling, that she'd only stayed with me because I provided a free place for her to live, that I was basically just her meal ticket while she waited for something better to come along. Every word was like a knife, and she was smiling while she twisted each one deeper. 3 years of my life, thousands of dollars in support, and an $8,200 ring. And this was what I got in return. She grabbed her coat and purse, looked at my mom with this sickeningly sweet expression, said, "Thanks for dinner," and walked out the front door like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of our family Christmas. The second the door closed behind her, my mom rushed over and hugged me tight. My sister was crying. My dad was red-faced and furious, pacing around and muttering about what kind of person does something like that. My brother just stood there shaking his head in disbelief. I just stood there holding this $8,200 ring that suddenly felt like the stupidest purchase I'd ever made in my entire life. I drove home alone that night in complete shock. The streets were quiet and empty. Everyone else inside with their families having normal, happy Christmases. I still couldn't fully process what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I got back to my apartment, all of her stuff was still there. Her clothes hanging in the closet, her toiletries spread across the bathroom counter, Her shoes lined up by the door. It was like she'd never left, like nothing had happened. I spent the entire night packing everything she owned into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. I didn't sleep at all. I just kept packing and packing, fueled by a combination of shock and rage and determination. 3 years of her life, just stuffed into black trash bags like the garbage it apparently was. By 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, I had everything ready. I dragged every single bag and box down to the parking lot and piled it all in the snow next to the guest parking spots. It was freezing cold, maybe 20 degrees, and snow was starting to fall again. Her stuff was going to get wet and cold, and honestly, I didn't care. I took photos of everything for evidence, making sure to capture the timestamps. Then I sent her a text message stating clearly that her belongings were outside my building and she had until noon to pick them up before I donated everything to charity. Then I went back inside and called a locksmith. I had new locks installed on my apartment door by 10 a.m. It cost me $200 for the emergency holiday service, but it was worth every single penny for the peace of mind. Around 11:30 a.m., I heard a car pull up outside. When I looked out my window, I saw Aurora getting out of the passenger side of a sleek black sports car. And who was driving? Oliver, her ex-boyfriend. The guy she'd been cheating on me with for 4 months? He got out of the car too, and I watched them survey the pile of her belongings sitting in the snow. This was about to get interesting. I stayed at my window watching them. I wasn't about to go down there and give them any satisfaction of a confrontation. Oliver was exactly what I expected based on the way Aurora had described him. Tall guy with a gym build, wearing an expensive leather jacket and designer jeans. The kind of dude who thinks money and muscles make him invincible. He was walking around the pile of Aurora's stuff, kicking at boxes and shaking his head like this was all beneath him. Aurora was frantically trying to figure out what to grab first, going through bags and tossing things around, making an even bigger mess than before. I could see her getting increasingly agitated, pointing up at my window and gesturing wildly. Then Oliver started walking toward my building entrance, and I knew this was about to get ugly. I went down to the lobby because I figured if I didn't, he'd start buzzing my apartment repeatedly or causing a scene in the hallway. When I opened the lobby door, Oliver was standing there with this smug grin on his face, hands in his pockets like he owned the place. He looked me up and down, sizing me up like I was nothing. He told me Aurora needed help carrying her stuff and that I should be a man about it and help her out. The audacity was almost impressive. I just stared at him and said her stuff was in the parking lot. She could take what she wanted, and they both needed to leave. Simple as that. He didn't like that answer. He took a step closer, getting right in my personal space, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Way too much of it. He said maybe I didn't understand the situation. He said Aurora was with him now, that she'd upgraded, and that I needed to show some respect. I stepped to the side and told him again to just take the stuff and go. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted this to be over. That's when he made his move. He shoved my shoulder hard, trying to push me back and intimidate me. I stumbled but caught myself. And before I could even think about it, my training from high school wrestling kicked in automatically. When he came at me again, I grabbed his wrist and used his momentum against him, stepping to the side and pulling him forward instead of resisting. Here's the thing about parking lots in winter. They're slippery as anything. Oliver's expensive dress shoes had zero traction on the icy pavement, and when I redirected his lunge, his feet went right out from under him. He went down hard, landing right in a snowbank that the plows had piled up next to the building entrance. He landed flat on his back, his fancy leather jacket getting packed with snow and slush. He was yelling and cursing, but he wasn't done yet. He got up, absolutely furious, and charged at me again, swinging wildly like he was in some kind of action move. I ducked under his punch easily, since he was broadcasting it from a mile away. He slipped again on the ice, this time going face first into the snow. Aurora came running over, shrieking at me like I'd attacked him unprovoked, calling me every name in the book and threatening to call the police. I just held up my hands and calmly explained that he came at me first, that I was defending myself, and that they both needed to leave my property now. Oliver got up covered in snow and slush. His expensive jacket was ruined, and his pride was even more damaged. He was red-faced and breathing hard, but I could tell he wasn't going to try anything else. He'd embarrassed himself twice already, and knew he'd lost. They both started loading her stuff into his car, throwing bags and boxes into the trunk and back seat, while Aurora kept yelling at me the whole time. She said I was pathetic, that I'd regret this, that Oliver was 10 times the man I'd ever be. The usual stuff. I just stood there silently, arms crossed, until they loaded up what they could fit and drove off. They left probably a third of her stuff still sitting in the parking lot because it wouldn't all fit in his car. I thought that was the end of it. I figured they'd come back for the rest, or I'd donate it, and that would be that. But I was so incredibly wrong. About 3 hours later, I heard another car pull up. When I looked out my window, it was Aurora again. This time she was alone, and something about her body language immediately seemed off. She got out of her car and just stood there in the parking lot, staring at the remaining pile of her belongings in the snow. Then something in her completely snapped. She started grabbing her stuff and throwing it everywhere like she was possessed. Clothes were flying through the air. Shoes were being hurled at my building. She grabbed a box of kitchen items and just dumped everything all over the parking lot, pots and pans and utensils scattering across the asphalt. She was shrieking incoherently. I couldn't even make out actual words. Just this primal rage sound that didn't even seem human. She picked up what looked like a framed photo of us together and hurled it at my building as hard as she could. It smashed against the brick wall below my window, and glass shattered everywhere across the sidewalk. Other tenants started coming out onto their balconies to see what the commotion was about. Someone yelled at her to calm down. That only seemed to make her angrier. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Just her destroying everything, working herself into a complete frenzy, screaming at my building like it had personally wronged her. Then she grabbed a decorative vase from one of the boxes, something heavy and ceramic that we'd bought together at a craft fair. She wound up like a baseball pitcher and threw it directly at my window with everything she had. It didn't reach the third floor. It smashed on the ground below, but the intent was absolutely clear. That's when I called the police. I told them my ex-girlfriend was destroying property in my apartment parking lot and had thrown objects at my building. They said they'd send someone right away. Aurora must have heard the sirens getting closer because she suddenly stopped her rampage. She just stood there, breathing heavily, surrounded by the disaster she'd created. Broken glass, scattered clothes, destroyed boxes everywhere. 2 police officers pulled up and got out of their patrol car. They approached her calmly, asking her name and what was going on. She immediately went into victim mode, telling them I'd thrown her out cruelly, that I'd kept all her stuff, that I was abusive and controlling and she was just trying to get her belongings. The officers asked for my side of the story. I came down with my phone, showing them the text messages from earlier with the timestamps clearly visible. I showed them the photos I'd taken of her stuff neatly piled up before she arrived. I showed them the receipt from the locksmith and explained the whole Christmas incident. One officer was taking detailed notes while the other was trying to calm Aurora down because she was getting increasingly agitated. She kept interrupting, yelling over everyone, refusing to let anyone else speak. The officer asked her multiple times to calm down and stop yelling. She ignored every request, getting louder and more aggressive with each passing minute. Then she made the biggest mistake possible. When one of the officers stepped closer to try to get her to stop yelling, she shoved him. Not particularly hard, but it didn't matter. Any physical contact with a police officer is a terrible idea. Both officers immediately changed their demeanor. They told her she was under arrest for disorderly conduct and assaulting an officer. She completely lost it, shrieking that they couldn't arrest her, that she was the victim here, that this was all my fault. They cuffed her and walked her to the patrol car, while she thrashed and yelled the entire way. She was still screaming about how unfair this was when they put her in the back seat. The officers told me I should seriously consider filing for a restraining order given her behavior and the destruction of property. They took photos of the scene, got witness statements from several neighbors who'd watched the whole thing from their balconies, and gave me a case number before driving off with Aurora still yelling in the back seat. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I kept expecting her to show up again or for something else to happen. I filed for a restraining order and got a temporary one approved immediately based on the police report and all the witness statements. I had to go to court for the permanent order hearing about 2 weeks later, but Aurora didn't even show up. Maybe she didn't think I was serious, or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, the judge granted the permanent restraining order by default. 5 years with absolutely no contact of any kind. I thought I was finally free of this nightmare. Then, about a week after Aurora's arrest, I got an email at work from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was Oliver. The email was full of threats. He said I'd ruined his relationship, that Aurora was struggling because of me, that I needed to drop the restraining order and apologize to her immediately. He said if I didn't make things right, he'd make sure I regretted it for the rest of my life. He went into specific detail about knowing where I worked, where I lived, even where my parents lived. He described my daily routine in a way that made it clear he'd been watching me. It was clearly harassment and honestly terrifying to read. I immediately forwarded the email to my company's HR department and explained the entire situation from the beginning. Our company takes threats against employees very seriously, especially threats of violence. HR contacted the corporate legal team right away and asked if I wanted to file a police report. I absolutely did. But here's where things took an interesting turn. Our HR legal team did some digging and discovered that Oliver worked for a company that had a business relationship with ours. They were one of our vendors for accounting software. The legal team reached out to Oliver's employer and shared the threatening emails, explaining that one of their employees was making violent threats against our staff. Oliver's company apparently had a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. It was right there in their employee handbook. Within 48 hours, I got a call from the detective handling my case. He informed me that Oliver's employer had terminated him immediately upon seeing the emails, and that his company was cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation. I felt a grim satisfaction hearing that. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. 2 days after Oliver got fired, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I decided to answer it. It was Oliver, and he sounded completely different from the aggressive guy who'd charged at me in the parking lot. He was desperate and panicked, his voice cracking like he was about to cry. He started practically begging me not to press charges. He said he'd lost his job and couldn't afford a lawyer. He said his whole life was falling apart. Then he said something that actually surprised me. He told me Aurora had been playing him the entire time. She'd told him I was abusive and controlling, that I'd isolated her from her friends and family, that I was emotionally torturing her. She played the victim so convincingly that he believed every single word without question. He said once Aurora moved in with him after leaving me, he finally realized what she was really like. She'd go through his phone constantly, accusing him of cheating with every woman he so much as talked to. She'd throw screaming fits over absolutely nothing. She expected him to pay for everything while she contributed nothing. She'd maxed out a credit card he'd stupidly given her access to within 2 weeks, buying designer clothes and expensive dinners with her friends, while not contributing a single dollar to rent or bills. She was doing the exact same thing to him that she'd done to me for 3 years. And now, he finally understood why I'd ended it the way I did. He apologized over and over, saying he'd been an idiot, that he'd do anything to make things right. He admitted he should have talked to me before sending those threatening emails, instead of believing everything Aurora told him. I told him I'd think about the charges, but that he needed to stay far away from me and never contact me again. He agreed immediately and hung up. I never heard from Oliver again after that conversation. 4 months passed and life started feeling normal again, for the first time in years. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Aurora. She'd always complained when I wanted to hang out with my buddies, so I'd gradually stopped making plans with them. Now I was actually enjoying my social life again. I started going to the gym regularly, getting back in shape both physically and mentally. I had more money in my bank account because I wasn't supporting someone who contributed nothing. It was amazing how much better life felt when you weren't constantly being drained by someone who only took and never gave. My family was incredibly supportive through everything. My mom called me every few days just to check in and make sure I was doing okay. My dad kept saying he was proud of how I handled the whole situation calmly and by the book. My sister apologized repeatedly for not seeing through Aurora sooner. About 6 weeks after everything went down, I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a golden retriever mix I named Max. Having him around helped more than I can possibly explain. Coming home to something that was genuinely happy to see me, with no drama or manipulation or ulterior motives. Just pure, unconditional love and a wagging tail. I even started dating again, cautiously at first. I met a woman named Sophia through a friend at work. We'd been seeing each other for about 2 months and things were going really well. Nothing rushed or intense, just healthy and normal. She was kind and funny and actually contributed when we went out together. It was refreshing after everything I'd been through. Then on a random Tuesday evening in mid-March, I heard a knock at my apartment door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart immediately sank. It was Aurora, standing there holding a plate covered in plastic wrap, smiling like absolutely nothing had ever happened between us. I just stood there frozen, staring through the peephole at Aurora, holding that plate of what appeared to be cookies. She had this unsettling smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed nicely, hair done, makeup perfect, like she was going on a first date or showing up for a job interview. She knocked again, softer this time, almost gentle. My heart was racing because she was actively violating the restraining order just by being there. And I knew from experience this could go very wrong very quickly. I pulled out my phone and immediately started recording video through the peephole. I wanted documentation of absolutely everything that was about to happen. Evidence would be important. Max was at my side, and a low growl was rumbling in his chest. Dogs can sense things, and he could definitely tell something was wrong with this situation. She knocked a third time and called out in this sickeningly sweet voice, saying she just wanted to talk. That she'd made me cookies as an apology. That she missed me and wanted to make things right between us. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out through it that she needed to leave immediately because she was violating a court order and I would call the police. Her smile faltered for just a second when she realized I wasn't going to open the door. She quickly recovered and said she knew about the restraining order, but she thought if I saw how sorry she was, I'd give her another chance. She said the past few months had been really hard for her, that she'd realized what a huge mistake she'd made, that Oliver had kicked her out after only 2 months together, that I was actually the love of her life, and she'd been too blind to see it before. She was laying it on thick, using that manipulative tone I'd heard so many times before when she wanted something from me. I told her again to leave, or I was calling the police. And that's when I heard another voice from inside my apartment. It was Sophia, asking if everything was okay. She'd come over for dinner and had been in the kitchen when the knocking started. The second Aurora heard another woman's voice through the door, everything changed. The sweet mask dropped instantly, and her face contorted into pure rage. She started shrieking, demanding to know who was in there with me, calling me every name she could think of while pounding on the door. The plate of cookies was still in one hand. She yelled that I'd moved on already, that I was a liar and a cheat, that she knew I'd probably been seeing someone the whole time we were together. The irony was absolutely insane considering she'd literally been cheating on me for 4 months while we were together. I told Sophia to stay back and call 911 immediately. Then I positioned myself near the door, ready to block it if Aurora somehow tried to force her way in. Max was barking now, protective and alert, sensing the danger. Aurora was completely unhinged at this point, kicking at my door and still shrieking. Then I heard the plastic wrap ripping, and I looked through the peephole to see her grabbing cookies off the plate. These weren't normal cookies. They looked rock hard, almost like hockey pucks. She must have overbaked them or something because they looked more like weapons than food. She started throwing them at my door. These hard projectiles were just smashing against the wood and the frame with surprising force. Some of them shattered on impact, others bounced off and left actual dents in the drywall of the hallway. My neighbor across the hall opened his door to see what all the commotion was about, and a cookie flew past his head and slammed into his doorframe. He yelled at Aurora to stop, and she turned on him, shrieking that this was none of his business and to get back inside. He quickly shut his door, and I heard him yelling through it that he was calling the cops too. Aurora was in a full meltdown now, throwing cookies at my door, at the walls, at the ceiling. She was crying and yelling simultaneously, making this guttural sound of pure rage and desperation. She kept screaming that I'd ruined her life, that she'd given me everything, that I was supposed to wait for her. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and so could Aurora. But instead of running or trying to leave, she just kept throwing cookies and shrieking like she'd completely disconnected from reality. When the police arrived, 2 officers came up the stairs and found Aurora in the hallway, surrounded by broken cookies and destruction. She had tears and mascara running down her face. Her hair was a mess from where she'd been pulling at it, and she was still holding one cookie in her hand, ready to throw. The officers immediately recognized the situation for what it was. They asked her name, and when she told them, one of the officers actually said he remembered her from the incident 4 months ago. Same officers who'd arrested her the first time. They asked her if she knew she had a restraining order against her, and she actually said yes, but that she needed to talk to me, that she had to explain things, like that somehow made it okay to violate a court order. One of the officers picked up one of the intact cookies from the ground and actually laughed. He made a comment about how it was hard as a rock and asked if she was trying to use baked goods as weapons. Aurora started arguing with them, saying they didn't understand, that I was the problem here, that she was actually the victim in all of this. They asked her calmly to come with them, and she refused. She said she wasn't leaving until she talked to me, that I owed her that much after everything. The officers explained clearly that she was under arrest for violating the restraining order and for disorderly conduct. That's when she tried to pull away from them. She jerked her arm back when one officer reached for her and started backing down the hallway. The officers weren't rough, but they were firm. They told her multiple times to stop resisting and to put her hands behind her back. She was still arguing the entire time, still trying to justify why she should be allowed to be there. They eventually got her in handcuffs while she cried and yelled, then walked her down to the patrol car while she protested every single step of the way. My neighbor came out after they left, and we surveyed the damage together. There were cookie pieces and crumbs everywhere, dents in the walls from the harder projectiles, scuff marks all over my door from where she'd been kicking it. Sophia was pretty shaken up inside. She'd never experienced anything remotely like that before in her life. I explained the entire history while we cleaned up the cookies from the hallway together. I showed her the restraining order paperwork, the police reports from before, everything. She was incredibly understanding about the whole thing, but I could tell she was processing just how intense the situation actually was. We spent the rest of the evening just talking, and honestly, it ended up making us closer as a couple. She saw me handle a genuinely crazy situation calmly and by the book, and she appreciated that I'd been honest with her about my past from the beginning. Max stayed close to both of us the whole night, like he knew we needed the comfort. The legal aftermath took a few months to fully resolve. Aurora was charged with violating the restraining order, disorderly conduct, and they even added destruction of property for the damage to the hallway. Apparently, my landlord was pretty upset about the dents in the walls. She tried to fight the charges in court, claimed she was having a mental health crisis, and shouldn't be held responsible for her action. Her public defender attempted to paint her as someone who'd simply made a mistake in a moment of emotional distress. The judge wasn't having any of it, especially given her documented history and the fact that this was her second arrest related to me. He said she'd been given chances and warnings, and had chosen to ignore all of them. She ended up getting 45 days in jail, 18 months of probation after that, and was ordered to pay restitution to both me and my landlord for the repairs to the hallway and my door. The restraining order was extended for another 5 years from that date. About 3 weeks after her sentencing, I got a letter forwarded from the county jail. Aurora had written me 4 pages begging for forgiveness, saying she'd changed, asking me to write back. I didn't even finish reading it, tore it up and threw it in the trash. 2 months later, I got a call from a mutual friend. Aurora had apparently tried to pull the same routine on some other guy she'd met. Moved in fast, contributed nothing, played victim, when he finally pushed back. Except this guy had actually looked her up online first and found the court record. He kicked her out after 3 weeks. She was now living with her mom in another state, working retail and owing thousands in restitution she couldn't pay. Oliver's story wasn't much better. I heard through the grapevine that he'd been job hunting for 6 months before anyone would hire him. His new position paid about half what he used to make. Turns out sending threatening emails from your work account leaves a paper trail that follows you around. As for me, Sophia and I hit our 1-year anniversary last month. My family loves her. My mom keeps making comments about grandchildren, which Sophia thinks is hilarious. We spent last Christmas at my parents' house, same place where everything went down the year before. My mom made the same prime rib dinner. After dessert, my dad raised his glass and made a toast. He said he was proud of me. That was it. Simple. But it meant everything. I still have that $8,200 ring sitting in a safe. Last week, I finally took it to a jeweler to get it appraised for resale. He offered me $5,400. I told him I'd think about it, walked out of the store and called Sophia, asked her what she thought about going ring shopping together sometime. She said she'd like that. So yeah, that's where things stand now. Max is sleeping on the couch. Sophia's coming over in an hour, and I've got an appointment at a different jeweler next Saturday. Aurora spat in my face on Christmas in front of my whole family. 14 months later, I'm about to propose to someone who actually deserves the ring. Funny how things work out. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.